For years, there's been a gathering in the West Bank in Bethlehem, where Christ was born, called Christ at the Checkpoint, getting its name from the fact that Jesus would get stopped if he tried to go, into Bethlehem.
My name is Michael Spath, and I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace. We're in our 22nd year as a voice of conscience for peace, justice, human rights, and intercultural encounter, based here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So tonight we welcome our friend Shane Claiborne. Shane and I reconnected. He was here a number of years ago with his friend Mike Martin from Colorado. They had a forge right outside that door, and they were beating guns into farm and garden implements. And so they were on the Beating Guns tour, and we hosted them, like I said, a number of years ago. Well, Shane and I reconnected in Atlanta last summer when we were both at the Carter Center for meetings from the Churches for Middle East Peace, which began our conversation that brought him to Indiana this weekend. He was in Boerne, Indiana last night, this morning, with a group of Mennonites there. He'll be here tonight, and he'll be at what I call the Mennonite Vatican up in Goshen and Elkhart tomorrow. Shane has worked with Mother Teresa in India and with Christian Peacemaker Teams in Baghdad during the U.S. bombing of Iraq. Gosh, can it be more than 20 years ago now? Along with others, he founded The Simple Way, an intentional community in Philadelphia, and Red Letter Christians, whose simple message is to live their lives according to the answer to the question, what if Jesus really meant what he said? He's been a courageous witness in the cause of environmental justice, advocating for the homeless, standing against violence and war, end to the death penalty, stopping gun violence, and working for justice and political rights for Palestinians. In 2023, Shane was presented the King Center's beloved Community Award for Social Justice by Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King's daughter, Dr. Bernice King. And I didn't know this about Shane, and I'll let you give the background to it, okay? But he implored his hosts, Chris and Laura Lahr, that before he heads to Elkhart and Goshen tomorrow, they must stop at the Fort Wayne Landmark, Stoner's Magic Store. So I'll let you tell the backstory. So anyway, we're the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace, so we're happy to welcome Shane Claiborne tonight.
Well, I wasn't quite ready for all that. I like magic and the circus. I went to circus school back in the day before I started working in the church, and then found out there's not a big difference. Church has its own clowns and performers and whatnot, but I still love the circus, and I find it very helpful in the work of liberation and freedom. We need to laugh, we need to have joy, and so the circus comes in handy. So I'm going to go home with some treats from the old magic shop in Fort Wayne. It's great to be here. I want to say a few things. Is that there's some of my dear friends in this room and folks that are doing such beautiful work right here. Bob Gross is here somewhere. Give me a little wave. This brother, if you don't know, their family are just legends in the movement to heal wounds of violence, and so it's great to be here with you. And my friends Chris and Laura are somewhere. Chris is and Laura lived in the Simple Way. We went to school together at Eastern, and they're doing amazing work here in Fort Wayne too. There's a bunch more of you, so I won't embarrass you. But I'm really humbled to be here tonight. And I think as we think of the moment that we're living in, there's obviously a heaviness on our hearts, the reality of the escalating violence and genocide in Gaza and the violence in Iran, around the world. And I think of the words of Dr. King, as we thought of this evening, that he said, these are extreme times that we're living in. And it's amazing that he said this over 50 years ago, right? That these are extreme times we're living in. The question isn't whether or not we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hatred or extremists for love? And as we think of the way that religion has been distorted, it's true of almost every major faith, that no one kills with more passion than when they think that God is on their side. And it's true certainly of Christianity. It's true if you go in the Abrahamic Mosque in Hebron, you see the bullet holes in the wall from a Zionist that opened fire on Muslims in prayer. We certainly know the distortions of Islam that do violence, asking, for God's blessing. And so I think to be here tonight to say we're going to stand on the side of love is a beautiful thing. I know there's folks of all different faiths and folks that are not religious at all, but compelled by heart and conscience to be here. So thanks for coming out. I'm sure there's lots of things you could do on a Sunday night in Fort Wayne. And some folks came down from Michigan, and some folks have driven, a long time to be here, so thanks for being here. I'm going to share a little bit, and we're going to leave plenty of time for dialogue and interaction. I've got a few slides I'll show in a minute, but I do want to begin by saying when we say that these are extreme times, I think of the words of Ron Sider, who passed away just a few years ago. He said this in 1984. It gave birth to the Christian Peacemaker Teams at the Mennonite World Conference. Then that's now the group that I went to Iraq with during the bombing. But he said these words, and I'll just open with them. The words of Ron Sider. He said, "Unless we are prepared to risk injury and death in nonviolent opposition to the injustices our societies foster, we don't dare even whisper another word about pacifism to our sisters and brothers and siblings in desperate lands. Unless we are ready to die developing new nonviolent attempts to reduce international conflict, we should confess that we never really meant the cross was an alternative to the sword." And those words, kind of inspired a movement to say we want to get in the way of violence. We want to get in the way of injustice, and for a long time, get in the way was the motto of the Christian Peacemaker Teams. And I'll just open with one story. As we went to Iraq, we were living in community for about a decade, and on the north side of Philadelphia, by the way, if you ever come to Philly, make sure you visit us. We're right in Kensington, and we saw the escalation of violence in response to 9/11. And Kathy Kelly, who's a dear friend, had called and said, "We're going to lead a delegation to Iraq. Would you want to go?" And I said, "I think I need to pray about that." And I did, talked to my mom about it, and I felt clearer than ever that was what I needed to do at that particular time. And when we went into Iraq, this is March of 2003. We didn't really know for sure, but we ended up being there as the shock and awe campaign began in Iraq. And I talked to a lot of people that weren't alive in 2003. And so this was a very familiar violence that we see right now in Gaza and Iran. There were over 900 bombs a day that were being dropped, largely in Baghdad, and that's where we were living. So we saw the horror of war. We were documenting it. We went to hospitals, we went to bomb sites, we went to places like the Amaria shelter, which is not a name that everyone knows, but it's a shelter that was filled with women and children in Iraq. They didn't even allow men. They wanted to make sure the kids were safe, and it was packed with women and children. In the U.S. Dropped 2 smart bombs on it and killed everyone inside there. So as we think of that, right, this is all, I think, a backdrop of the horror that violence is. And I mean, those memories still haunt me of what we saw during the bombing. But I also want to share the power of love that I experienced in Iraq. And I mean, everywhere we went, we were welcomed into people's homes, into people's lives. One of the most powerful stories was as we were leaving Baghdad, we decided half of our team would stay and half of our team would come back to the U.S. and work to stop the escalating war and violence. So we came back, and on our way out of Baghdad, we had to drive the kind of treacherous road from Baghdad to Amman, Jordan. So it's through the desert, and at that time, you know, it was surreal. It was a war scene. So cars are still on fire, bridges are down, and the planes are still flying over. So we're driving through, and we hit something in the road that popped the tire of our car, that sent our car spinning, and we went off the road. It flipped over on its side, and we kind of had to climb out of the car. I mean, this is not a context where you can dial 911, right? So we're just sitting in the middle of the desert, and one of my friends, Cliff Kendi, I think he's been here before to Fort Wayne. He had a head injury, and so we're trying to just, make sure he's all right, kind of praying, at the side of the road. And then eventually the first car that we see, it starts small on the horizon, it gets closer and closer, and they pull over and they take care of us. And they jump out of the car, these Iraqi men, and they pull us in. They can tell we're desperately in need of help. And they drive us into the nearest town. It's a little town called Arutba in the Anbar province. And when we get into the town, it's frantic. Folks are running around, and the doctors are waving their hands in the air outside the hospital, and they say, why? And we're getting translation of all this, and they said, they're asking why is our government dropping bombs on them, and one of the bombs just hit the children's ward of their hospital. And so they said they bombed the school, they bombed the hospital, they bombed our whole town, and then we're thinking, we don't want to be a burden, I don't know what we're going to do. But then the doctor says, no, we're just explaining why we can't take you into the hospital. We're still going to take care of you, of course, right? And they set up a little shanty clinic. And each of us had a bed, and folks started bringing us gifts, food and water, and these doctors nursed Cliff and our team back to life. And I had a separated shoulder, and they kind of bandaged everybody up. And I mean, I'm like doing my best to hold it together, if you know what I mean. I mean, we're just like so moved by their love. And I started thinking, how can we thank them? And so I pulled all of our money together from all of us, and with this big pile of Iraqi dinar. And I kind of pulled aside the manager of the hospital, and I said, we just want to say thank you. And he looks at the money as I'm trying to hand it to him, and he goes, if you just want to say thank you, then say thank you. And he literally said, keep the money. We don't want your money. We want you to know that we love you. And and he then said, all that we would want you to do in return is tell the story. Tell a good story. Tell a story of love and compassion from us, and not as an exception. He says, this is also who we are. And so we've been telling that story for a lot of years, and it never gets old. And in fact, we have a community in North Carolina that named itself Rootba House after the love that we experienced in that town. And so for years we wanted to go back, and just some years ago we got to go back. It's not exactly easy to travel that same place, but we went back that desert road to through Amman to Rootba, and we had told them, we gave them the heads up. We said we'd love to reconnect with the doctors that, now has been years. We said that saved our lives, and so we go back in, and it is like a royal reception. There's this celebration in the town, and we come in, and the one guy says to us, "We don't get a lot of visitors." And they said, "But we also want you to know how much it meant to us, that you would come back, and we know it's not easy to get back here." And so they take us everywhere. They're like, "You got to meet the mayor." So they take us to the mayor. And the mayor, we tell the story of how these doctors had saved our lives. And the mayor starts talking with translation. And he goes, "This is the stuff that heals the world." He said, "We don't need more violence. We need relationships and friendships." And then the mayor says, "We need to keep an ongoing friendship going." And he said, "We need a sister city in the United States to Rootba." And I'm like, "Philadelphia, it's a city of love, right?" And the mayor goes, "No, it's too big." He says, "It's a big city. We need a smaller city, a small town that's similar to Rootba." And then the mayor gets translation, right? This is all through translators. And he says, "I've only been to one town in the United States. And it's a little town in North Carolina called Durham. And that's where the Rootba House is," right? So I'm like, "Whoa!" I get my little Pentecostal self going on, and I'm like, "What?" I said, "We have a community there called Rootba House named after this entire story." And the mayor goes, "Then it's done." And he says, "We'll become a partner city with Durham, and we will start a community in Rootba, and we'll call it Durham House." And so all that to say is that I am convinced that part of what we need is courage right now to believe that when we take risks and when we build relationships that are outside of our comfort zones, like the Spirit moves and love moves and wounds are healed. So I've really that's a part of what the backdrop for me, even talking tonight, I think, is that it's that kind of extreme love that has convinced me that we will not build a better world, as Jimmy Carter said, by killing other people's children. Right? That Jesus was right when he said, "You live by the sword, you die by the sword." We've lived that myth over and over and over, that we will kill to try to show that killing is wrong, that we will try to use violence to stop violence, and we see that, as Dr. King said, it just begets more and more violence. And so I think as we think of the United States, one of the things that we can grieve is that Dr. King was right. We are the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. That we think of the guns and the gun violence. We came here with the Forge, and in the United States right now, we're losing over, welcome y'all, we're losing over 30,000 lives every single year to gun violence. We see now that gun violence is the #1 cause of death of children and youth in America, more than cancer or car accidents. We're producing guns and putting them into the world at the rate of one gun every 3 seconds. 9.5 million guns a year. As we think of the death penalty, so many friends like Bob Gross and others that are working for the abolition of the death penalty, insisting that it doesn't heal the wounds of violence. It just creates new wounds and new trauma and pain for other families. When it comes to the death penalty, the United States is always in the top 10. Often in the top 5 executing countries in the world, in the company of China Saudi Arabia and Iran, and countries that are not exactly known as champions for human rights, right? And so this idea that I think we're so addicted to violence. You know, the militarism, it's like that now we have in our nuclear arsenal the capacity of 50,000 Hiroshima bombs. And we're the only country that's ever actually used those. And we did it twice in 1 week in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So as we think of the tragedy of violence in the world, I think we've got some work to do. That's why you're here tonight, right? I have been bringing a couple things with me. This is a pastor friend of mine that he gave me this Bible and the Bible case. And said, this is the top-selling Bible case in America. Not joking. And I didn't think too much of it when I first saw it, to be really honest. It looks a lot like the Bible case I carried to high school. I know this is a safe place where I can share openly. But, you know, then I looked at it closer, though. He says, open it up. It's actually not a Bible case at all. It's a concealed carry. It's actually designed for a gun. And this Bible case is selling more Bible cases than actually. So that's why we can say this has become a form of idolatry. Right? Come on, somebody. I know we're not all Pentecostals up in here, but this is a form of idolatry when we see religion abused to create harm. And so in the end, one of the surest things that we can say of God is that God is love. Right? Scripture says that God is love, and that if we love one another, God is evident among us. So I'm convinced that Barbara Brown Taylor was right when she says, in the end, I'm going to switch on you. Is that what we're doing? Okay. All right. Barbara Brown Taylor said, in the end, if our theology doesn't make us more loving, there's something wrong with our theology. Yes. If our theology gets in the way of loving our neighbor, we should choose to love our neighbor because God never called us to love our theology. Come on, right? Our theology should make us more loving. And there is theology that is not making people more loving. It's making people more violent. And when we have a version of Christianity or any other religion that makes us more violent and less loving, there is something wrong with that religion, right? I would contend that that's one of the surest litmus tests of good theology is does it produce good fruit, right? Does it make us more loving in the world? And there are versions of Christianity right now, or counterfeit Christianity, that are actually excusing and licensing the death of thousands and thousands of people. And if your theology somehow lends you to justify the killing of tens of thousands of children in Gaza and Iran in order to expedite the apocalypse, come on, or try to bring the second coming of Christ, that is some messed up theology that makes a monster out of God. And so I think what we get to do is create a movement of love, and for many of us, I think that also means embracing a better theology. I heard someone years ago that said they had given up on Christianity, and I'm quick to listen and slow to speak in many of those conversations because there's many things that need just to be listened to and honored, the pain that people have had from twisted versions of Christianity. But as I was talking, they said their experience was that they had a friend who was like 14 years old and was raped, and they talked to a pastor about that, and the pastor said, God must have had that happen for a reason. And that's the kind of hurtful, sick theology. I said, so I think for some folks it's not that they've given up on Christianity, but they've given up on Calvinism. Right? Or they've given up on a construct that is hurtful. Right? They've given up on a theology that is too small. So I think one of the things that we have to say, as Mother Teresa says, is that God is with those who are suffering. Christ is with those who are grieving the loss of their children. And God is in the rubble, right? God is in the suffering. And so I didn't come to preach tonight, but I think that as we dream together and as we build together, one of the things that we've got to do is organize, right? So Dr. King had this great line, those who love peace must learn to organize as effectively as those who love war. So I'm going to try to show a few slides here. I want to say, like, kind of as a disclaimer, that this is not meant to be a formal PowerPoint. This is not a class on organizing. But I think what I want us to do is stir our imagination tonight, to think about what it could look like, to organize in a way that will tenderize people's hearts, that will make them feel the heart of love and compassion a little more. So the first thing I would invite us to think about as we think of movement organizing right now is that proximity means everything, right? Proximity to the suffering of the world. Lean into the suffering of the world. This is a part of what I think creates a fire in our bones to end injustice is when we stay near to those who are victims of injustice, to stay near to those who are most impacted by violence. And you do much of that work, centering the voices of Palestinians. And the Black Lives Matter movement has done that by making systemic injustice have a name and a face. So we think of Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, and Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and so many countless hashtags and names that make it personal. And then I think our job is to let the suffering speak, as our brother Cornel West says, to amplify those who have been impacted so that people have to respond. And I just want to give you a few glimpses of what that's looked like for us in Philadelphia and several movements around the country. One of the things that we deal with in North Philly is the opioid crisis. We've lost over 1,200 lives to addiction. And we see bodies just all the time that are, struggling, laying down on our sidewalks. And it really hit an emergency level for us when our kids, actually what happened was the kids were going to have a snowball fight. It just snowed, and one of the kids said that they were worried that as they gathered the snow, there would be needles underneath the snow buried. We were like, that's so messed up, right? And so we had a campaign that was prompted by them that was called Need a Little Help. And we actually jarred up the needles and we put them in epoxy with the names of our city officials, our mayor and health commissioner and our city council members. And we delivered those needles in jars with quotes from the children and with a plea for we need a little help in Kensington, that we can't do this on our own, and our kids should not grow up worried about whether or not they're going to find a needle underneath the snow. And it was so moving. I mean, it was the kids that did it. We went to City Hall, and you can see they're delivering the jars of needles. We held a press conference. That's our now DA, Larry Krasner, did this jar. And now what that did was it humanized the lives of the state, right? And Dr. King said we've got to expose injustice so that it becomes uncomfortable for the people who have the power to change it. And we have city council folks that still tell me they have a jar of needles that is on their in their office to remind them of the urgency of what's at stake. And so that was our campaign, and it led to some really substantial change. We saw a response of folks that there was an emergency council formed. There were new resources towards recovery in Philadelphia. We now have needle canisters scattered throughout Kensington where people can dispose safely of needles. So all of that is just a part of the movement, right? This is the movement around the death penalty, that we dramatize the lives that are at stake by centering the people impacted, murder victims' family members, folks that were wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death. And this is at the Supreme Court with a coalition led by Death Penalty Action and other groups around the country, Journey of Hope, that are working to end the death penalty. But one of the things that we did in this particular gathering was we held the names of all the folks that have been executed by our government in the modern era. So since the kind of reinstatement of the death penalty, every year we had the names of all those executed, but we also carried the names of the victims. Because to be against the death penalty doesn't mean we're against justice or numb to the pain of victims of violence and murder. So we wanted to carry all of them in our hearts. That's why we had two different colors of roses, one yellow, one red, to remember those victims. And you'll see in the middle there, we remember the victims, but not with more killing. And so as we think of organizing, I think part of this is creating visual ways of showing the lives that are at stake, and also that the world can be different. You know, so we held that banner, "Stop Executions," on the steps of the Supreme Court, and of course we were arrested for that. But that's why, you know, John Lewis said we can smile on our mugshots because we know we're on the right side of history, right? So I think that kind of action, what it does is folks see it, and even we've had police officers arresting us that said, "Thank you for your witness. You know, we stand with you on some of these issues." You may have seen, you know, just 2 weeks ago, we had an interfaith gathering at Lockheed Martin, which is the biggest weapons contractor in the world. This is their weapons plant. One of them is right outside of Philadelphia. And that is, you know, there's an old saying that says, if you want to stop the violence, then figure out who's making money from it. And I want to say this quickly because we're streaming tonight, but one of the people who came this year was an executive at Lockheed Martin that worked there for over 30 years and was moved in part by the protests and the vigils outside of Lockheed Martin when he still worked there. And he has to be very careful about what he says. We keep this person confidential. But he says, after 9/11 happened, he can remember coworkers at Lockheed Martin after the terrible attack on 9/11. They said, we all just became millionaires. And then that work to build weapons has escalated to the point that we see now where the F-35s, the weapon systems that are used to destroy lives in Gaza, Iran, around the world, the surveillance systems on the southern border, the Hellfire missile system, the weapons used to bomb Venezuelan ships are the weapons of Lockheed Martin. And not the Tomahawk missile that hit the school in Iran, but the guiding system, the software of that was a Lockheed Martin's weapon system that killed the children in the school in Iran. So we gather outside to carry the names. And this, the past few years, this has continued to grow into a very powerful event with kids and families. And we center the names of the people who are being killed. We had many, Palestinian friends that shared as well. We held the names of the children in Gaza. This year, we actually laid the names of the children killed in the Iran school, and we memorialized their name, and that's what blocked the entrance of the weapons company. And the power of these public protests, I think, is in the centering of those who are impacted. So I think part of what we've got to do as we do this work is realize that people can change their mind. And my friend, who is now trying to heal some of the harm that he was complicit in creating, working for the weapons company, is a part of the peace movement, right? There's folks who are conscientious objectors to war that are some of the most credible voices in the movement to stop more war. We've had forums this year at Red Letter Christians of folks who have refused to kill, both for Israel and for Hamas. So one of those is a young woman, Sophia Orr. She's become a public figure because as a teenager, she decided she would rather go to jail than fight for the Israeli Defense Force. And she did go to jail. And we interviewed her, and I'll never forget it because I said, I mean, you're so young, how did you have that moral courage? And she said, just so nonchalantly, she said, well, I actually decided when I was 15 that I was willing to go to jail rather than to take lives in Gaza. We had a young man, Ahmed, who was raised under Hamas, and he was actually shot at one point and survived. And yet he talks about how he became convinced that we're not going to build a better world with more violence and more weapons, and he became a conscientious objector. So those voices have such credibility. And I would suggest part of what we've got to do right now is not just have self-righteous silos of progressive folks, but we need to amplify the voices of moral courage. And courage has lots of different forms, right? Courage, I think, can be seen in folks that are refusing to carry out orders that betray their conscience and their faith. We're just beginning to see some folks that are refusing orders of ICE. I've been calling them icebreakers. Because they're saying we cannot carry out these orders. And they have so much credibility, I think. So in addition to amplifying the people who are suffering from injustice, we can amplify the voices of folks who are conscientious objectors to that violence. So as we share tonight, I'll open it up in just a second. I think part of what we've got to recognize is that self-righteousness is really toxic, and that moral superiority comes in a lot of different flavors. I grew up, with a version of self-righteousness that was kind of the purity culture and the kind of fundamentalism and we said in Tennessee, don't smoke, drink, or chew, or go out with girls that do. That kind of thing. Like, don't listen to secular music, all that stuff. And yet, I think there's a different version of self-righteousness that can begin to infect and pollute progressive movements. And it's when we don't leave room for people to change their mind. We don't leave room for people to be redeemed, even folks that have participated or been complicit in systems of death. We can also say, thank you that we're not like those people, right? And we can forget in the rich tradition of Kenyan nonviolence, that we're fighting not against people, but against systems. And that as Scripture says, it's not a battle of flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. And so, let's have humility to allow people to change their mind. And then the last thing I would suggest is part of what we've got to do in the movement is not just protest, but protestify, right? Cast a vision for a different world. And part of our work, turning guns into garden tools, is rooted in that idea that all things can be made new, right? Every time I hold this little, I take little shovels when I'm on airplanes because it gets complicated, but it is interesting. Sometimes I get through a checkpoint and they'll be like, what exactly is that? I'll be like, that, my brother's a shovel made out of a gun. They'll be like, you got to check that. So anyway, I also tell my evangelical friends, this is what a gun looks like when it gets born again. and every time we turn a gun into a garden tool, we are declaring that all things can be made new. And that what's true of metal is also true of human beings, that hearts can change, right? People who have killed are more than the worst thing they've ever done. God is redeeming all things, that policies can change, right? And part of what's energizing to us is when it seems so slow to see change come, it's very refreshing to beat the heck out of a gun, so come on to Philly, or we'll bring the Fords back to Fort Wayne. But I'll never forget, one of the folks, I've seen so many people impacted by violence and all the different manifestations of it that have beaten on guns with us. But one I'll never forget, and I want to share, especially today in light of the mass shooting in Shreveport, is my friend, Sharon Risher. She's become a very close friend now, but her mother was killed by Dylan Roof. And her family, her two cousins, that was her community. A young man fueled by hatred, racism, extremism of the worst kind, racial terror, armed with a firearm we should never have, and went in and took their lives. But as she, at our first event together, she started beating on a gun, and I mean, she got passionate. You know, I said, "Do you want to take the hammer?" And she said, well, I won't say everything she said, but she said, "Yeah." And she started beating on it, and I mean, she's just shaking, and tears are rolling down her face, and I held her afterwards, and she said, "Everything I have thought about doing to Dylan Roof, I just took out on the barrel of that gun." And as you may know, she has become a very public figure in the movement to abolish the death penalty. And for her, I've heard her say many times, it's not so that Dylan Roof can sleep at night, but it's so I can sleep at night. I refuse to give him the power to make me filled with hatred. And I always leave room for a miracle of redemption. And some days we'll talk and it'll be hard to believe. It's the old prayer, I want to believe, but help my unbelief. It is sometimes hard to imagine that even someone like Dylan Roof could be transformed. And she says, but I've always got to believe that God's love is bigger than Dylan Roof's hatred. I've always got to believe it. So that takes such moral courage, right? It takes such, and it's holy work. So I'll show you just a few pictures of, the stuff, and I've got some of them on the back table of, our transformation of the guns. We chop them up all the time, and this is our very first gun that we had donated. It was an AR-15. So this is actually just like the guns that we saw when we were in Iraq. They're designed for one purpose. This is an AK-47, but those assault rifles, the AK-47s, the AR-15s, they are designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And we turned this one into a shovel and a rake. And that was like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We've been doing it ever since. So shovels, and now we get images of guitars that are made out of guns. We've got this is a saxophone in Mozambique. It's been made from an assault weapon. I made that tractor. I'm not going to brag, but that whole thing is made from chopped up guns. And now this is a piece of public art in Philadelphia where we have dozens and dozens of chopped up guns around Philadelphia at warm lights every 12 minutes for a life lost to gun violence. So these are all a part of proclaiming that world that is possible, that the prophets proclaim, where we beat our swords into plows and our spears into pruning hooks and study war no more. And the last thing I'll say tonight as we open it up is, as we've been kind of doing this work for the last decade, we've thought there's some things that we need to do to mobilize this kind of prophetic energy together, that there's great work that's happening out there, but maybe we need a new kind of big tent. So we had this idea of starting the National Peacemaker Association, NPA. So, very different from the NRA, but trying to mobilize around peacemaking. So in just a few weeks, you'll see the launch of it. But I think I've got a video here that this is might need your help, brother, on the video here. That one there. I think it's got. You'll see it may scroll here. So this is our website that's just being designed. It's the first time we've talked publicly about it. We had to get lawyered up. We're lawyered up, and we are now incorporated, and we'll be launching. You can become a card-carrying member of the NPA. So this will be happening in about a month. And the hope is that we will mobilize individuals and organizations together around the big banner of peacemaking, of building a world with less violence. And any money that we generate, we're just wanting to seed fund and support groups that are doing the work on the ground, support PC rows that are putting their energies towards building that kind of world. And so coming soon, the NPA. And I'm so glad to be here to hear what's already going on and ways that we can team up together. So we're going to open it up in just a second for questions. But thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this evening. NPA.
Yeah.
Protecting your right to live unarmed.
I just want to say, thank you, Shane, very much. I just want to say before we take questions that after we're done tonight, Shane will be over at the table where Chris Lahr is sitting, and he has books and other things to sell, and that will go to support the Simple Way in Philadelphia and his work there. So stop over, say hi to Shane, and help purchase a book or something to help support the Simple Way. Questions? Who would like to start? Tony?
Yes, something. How do you track these things? Where do you track these things?
Tell them.
The guns?
The guns, yeah. You get a gun. What do you track guns?
Yeah, the question, Tony is, right? Is how do we get the guns? And so there are lots of ways because we have lots of guns. We have more guns than people in the United States, even though 2/3 of Americans live unarmed. So if you do the math, like 2/3 of us live without guns, but we have more guns than people. So we are just saturated with guns. So we're trying to make it easy to get rid of a gun. It's actually much easier to get a gun than to get rid of a gun. So when people inherit, some people inherit guns they want to get rid of. We have a lot of guns that were used in a tragedy that the family wants to get rid of. Over half of our gun deaths are suicide. So we chop up a lot of guns that were used to take someone's own life. We got folks that are just rethinking guns in their homes. So in Philadelphia, we're in the emergency response network. So if, like, say a mom finds a gun in her 15-year-old's room, doesn't know what to do, calls 911, we are kind of a first responder to that. So we can do a home visit. It's like Ghostbusters, you know? We like bring the chop saws and we chop up the guns. So I just did a whole house that someone passed away, their family members were cleaning out the house, and they found guns everywhere. And so we chopped up all those. There's little fine points about transfer of firearms that we have to be careful of, so we never like bring guns back or things like that. But we had someone in Philly that their family, when they moved to Philly, a former military member of their family sent them an AR-15. Sent it in the mail. It was delivered to their house. They had children. They were like, we do not want this gun. They Googled how to get rid of the gun. It pulled us up. I'm like, I'll be there in 15 minutes. Wow. We chopped it up, and I made them a beautiful piece of art. I said, if your brother comes over, you don't want to have it on the wall. They'll recognize that is a chopped up AR-15. So, but that's like, we get them so many different ways. I mean, our hope is to keep building that network too. So there's chop saws all over the country that are ready to respond to, when people want to get rid of guns. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Just a little detailed follow-up. Do you record the codes on those guns before you destroy them?
Yeah, we do. We log everything. We've also worked with law enforcement, so there's different laws in different municipalities, but so there are times we work with police, and there's times that we safely and legally do this without police, because we're not transferring firearms, but destroying them is perfectly legal because they're no longer operable. It's not even considered a gun, and we train people on how to chop them. And ironically, in order to do this with insurance, we've had to get every NRA certification. So we're taking our credentials and running. Yeah. So yeah.
Who's next?
Feel free to branch out too. We've covered a lot of material.
Yes, please.
So ATF is involved to some degree?
Yeah, absolutely. ATF has specific ways that you destroy a gun, and that's what we use to do it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit, I think everybody in this room is I speak for myself, so frustrated with the right-wing Christian churches who are supporting genocide and everything that's going on. Talk a little bit about how we should think about our Christian brothers and sisters.
Yeah. So the question is about how do we interact with Christians who are justifying genocide and supporting the violence, ethnic cleansing. I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways that we can respond. Part of why we do the work at Red Letter Christians is to change the narrative, right? To challenge the narrative and theology of violent Christianity. So, you know, as Reverend Barber said, the way that we change the narrative is by changing the narrators, centering folks that have a more robust and healthy theology. And I think particularly we need to name the element of race in this as well, that it is white evangelicals and Catholics and others that have largely been complicit with the theology that is so violent. And you know, while a lot of people focus on the 80% or so of white evangelicals that continue to be the steadfast support for Trump, what we can miss is that the resistance has come from also many Christians, particularly black women. African American women have been the moral conscience of our country, not just now, but for many, many decades. And that it's over 80% of black women that have opposed Trump's rhetoric and policies. So not all of them are church women, but many of them are. And so I think naming that is helpful in seeing that we cannot allow the worst versions of evangelicalism to eclipse the entire landscape of what God's doing. And so I kind of think of it like if you go to a bad concert, you don't necessarily give up music. You just you gotta go to a better, you gotta find a better song, right? You gotta that's part of what I would say is that we can do better theology. We can, and if you go to Red Letter Christians, we've got hundreds of writers and preachers and theologians and artists and musicians that are trying to create a song together of Christianity that's life-giving and loving and redemptive. And I think we can engage people. I am not, part of why I have patience is because I've changed my mind on a lot of issues. And, these days sometimes I like to I'll do this right now. Like, how many of you would say you've changed your mind on an issue that is important? Yeah. In a couple of your line. But yeah. So like almost everybody in the room. But that's hopeful, right? Like we can change our mind. We can do better theology. So the answer to bad theology isn't no theology. I think it's good theology. And there's no better remedy to the violent Christianity than Jesus, the Prince of Peace. And I will just show this because Michael told me I had to see. I told you I gave it from. When Trump started, he's going to be reading the Bible this week, which is actually a good thing. Maybe they can read the Sermon on the Mount. That'd be incredible. But when he started signing Bibles, you may know that he still signs Bibles and sells them for $1,000 as if he wrote it almost. And yet, this is true. You can buy. Don't do it. Don't buy one, but you can buy one. $1,000 Trump Bible. So my friend had the idea. Robert Arcee had the idea of, well, let's make a real Trump Bible. And so this is the gospel according to Donald Trump. It's the KDV, the King Donald version. If you look at it, it's got everything about love and compassion redacted. So the whole Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes is gone. Anything about welcoming immigrants and caring for the widows and orphans, like it's all gone. So there's not much left. And, that's the point. So the Trump, there you go. So that's pretty
I still have to stand in the middle here.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the organization Seeds of Peace? And are you aware of anything in the U.S. that really focuses on young people and teaching them the ways of peace?
Seeds of Peace, and you said the last thing was teaching young people, like, that rings a bell, but I'm not...
It's the organization that brings Israeli and Palestinians together.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's something comparable in the U.S. that really focuses on young people and educating them.
So when it comes to like peace building among young people, I mean, this is actually really interesting because I have heard of that organization and the work that's happening. There's also work in Northern Ireland that's done similar work. There's just bringing folks together to see their common humanity. But incidentally, there's not many folks that I know that are doing that better than Chris right here, Chris Marr right here in Fort Wayne. So, just a second, and just quickly, like, this is worth you hearing because it's right here and it's so concrete. And sometimes it's easier to think about advocating for folks on the other side of the world than it is to wrestle with what it looks like right here. So just for a minute, I want you to meet Chris and hear what he's up to.
Yeah, so I lived in Philly for like 20 years, and we've been here for the last 7. And it was very difficult leaving the Holy Land for Fort Wayne. But I've learned to love it here. And the last 5 years, I've worked with a live community outreach. We're doing a Peace Family. We have some Peace Family members here. And we work in the schools. And Angelo Manti was the leader of it. His cousin died in about 2016. And he kind of came back and said, we got to do something about the violence in Fort Wayne. So he started a live community outreach, which was support networks for people who had family members who died from gun violence. They said, we got to do something more. And so they ended up getting into the schools. And so they started at Southside. And at first they went to the kids and, they were going to create a summer program, 3-week summer program, where we looked at Dr. King's 6 principles of nonviolence. And then have the kids create a culture of peace in their school. They started at Southside. And it's interesting at first, they're like, hey, you want us to go to the Peace Club? You want to be a part of this peace movement? And they just looked at them like, what? Hey, you get paid $750 for attending the academy, and then everybody turned into hippies. I love peace, I love peace. And I came in on the 2nd year, and I didn't really have an agenda. They just said, go in and make something happen. So I started going in, and I was kind of the sup man. I just wanted to say, what's up? What's up? What's up? Talking to the kids over and over and over again, building this relationship. And we started a peace club, and kids, and they started a peace count, which is basically every day there's a day of peace. There's a peace, there's a number of peace. You get 10 days of peace, get out a minute early, right? Last year was the 4th year that we've done it. In that freshman class, the last year, they only had 1 fight among the seniors last year. It was really good. And when we first started, it was like 70% days of peace. This year so far, we're like 87% at Southside. So they're seeing the numbers. And when they saw the numbers, they saw the kids beginning to step up in their leadership, right? The administration saw it and said, man, we need this in all the schools. So we did a referendum, and then we ended up, now we're in all 5 public high schools. And we're starting to get into New Haven, and maybe some other schools in the area. And but it's amazing to see other folks too that are in on this, and the peace grannies and Grammys, and it's beautiful because we meet every other week and we kind of go through Dr. King's letters and different teachings and things like that, nonviolence. But they get into the schools and they see the incredible relationship. It's not just about serving the kids, but getting to know the kids and building authentic relationships with the kids. And some of that we've seen a real impact. And so all that cool stuff isn't happening in Philly. I'm sorry, brother. It's at Fort Wayne where it's at.
You got a lot of good stuff happening right here already. And, what are we doing?
Yeah, we have time for a couple more questions. Who's up next? Yes, please.
Hopefully you'll know what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think we need to start that conversation.
All right.
Who's next?
Hey, Shane,
Yes, please. Yeah.
I don't want to necessarily shine a light on, like, I know you don't do things to, like, for publicity's sake, but obviously you know that the situation also brings you a lot of times where you're on the other side of the law or something, and you find yourself arrested. Literally just curious how long your rap sheet is.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, yeah, the question of what our record is, I guess, on
How many times you've been arrested for? And I know it's always peaceful, and I know you don't want to shine light on it. Just curious how many times you find yourself having to make that stand.
Not enough. No, I think that, when we think of getting arrested, our goal is never to get arrested, but to expose the problem. So, I mean, I don't know how many times, but 4 times this year, I guess, but I think that there's lots of ways that people can participate in bringing social change. And so, we have, when we even do the action at Lockheed Martin, we have folks that are on both sides of the property. I mean, the children were involved, like there's folks that have been to jail that shouldn't be risking in that particular way. There's all kinds of ways people are treated differently because of their social location. So there's lots of, but I think that it raises the question for us, right, of what does moral courage look like at this moment? And that's the right question, right? Courage is a lot of different forms. And like for my friend that used to work for Lockheed, he's not going to get arrested, but what he's doing is bringing significant change. He's trying to organize current and former employees to challenge the profiting from war. So, and again, like we are in a rich tradition of that kind of good trouble and holy mischief. And we do see laws change, right? Like we right now are using that, and we often argue that it's our religious freedom, that what we are doing when we welcome immigrants into our sanctuary, when we challenge anti-homeless laws, that so many of these things, this is why like Dan Berrigan, who was one of the great holy troublemakers in history, he said, maybe rather than calling it civil disobedience, we should call it divine obedience.
Oh, there you go.
Because our laws are out of sync with love and with God's heart. And so just because it's legal doesn't make it right. It was legal. Slavery was legal. Apartheid was legal. Assault weapons are legal. So the way that we change injustice is by challenging those norms. And that's why I also like Dr. King, when at one point when he got arrested, he's like, at first I was uncomfortable going to jail, but then I looked at history and I saw what good company I had. And he also, like when someone said that he was maladjusted, he turned that insult into a compliment, right? He said, maybe I am maladjusted, because there's some things that we don't want to be adjusted to. And so that's a great, shoulders to stand on. So thanks, brother.
Shane, say a word about your solidarity with Palestinians and say a word about the Church of the Crossroads.
Yeah, so for many years, I've been transformed by my friendships with Christian Palestinians and others, not just Christians, but particularly I think the depth and roots of Christian Palestinians, like Munther that's been here, Mitri Raheb, Jean Zaru, Matik, just countless ones, the new theologians of Tony Dake and others, there's just a robust theology of resistance and occupation under empire that's, hundreds and hundreds of years old. It's centered around Jesus. It's rooted in nonviolence. And so if you haven't been over there, I know many of you have, get over there. Go with Michael or go with some of the groups that are hosted where for years there's been a gathering in the West Bank in Bethlehem where Christ was born, called Christ at the Checkpoint, getting its name from the fact that Jesus would get stopped if he tried to go, into Bethlehem. And last year we did a U.S. version of that conference. It has the same acronym, CATC, Church at the Crossroads. And we held that outside of Chicago. We were actually hoping for a few hundred people, and like 200 or 300 was what we planned for. And then it was 400, 500. We had to stop registration because of the capacity, and over 500 people ended up live streaming it. So it was packed. And we're going to do that again next year. So keep an eye out. We've got some work to do to land where we're going to have it, but there's some really powerful possibilities. And this year's Christ at the Checkpoint has been postponed until December for now because of the current crisis there. They're still hoping to have that in December. So hope some of us may get over there for that.
Let's say thanks to Shane for being here.